just starting.
Hello, guten Tag, and welcome to another interview breakdown. But this time I want to do it a little differently, and I brought you here with us on set, and I'm going to go through the entire setup step by step in kind of a live demo. This interview is for a project later down the road, but I already wanted to break it down because it's quite interesting, because not only do we film with 3 different red cameras, but also all of our angles are moving. One on a slider, one on a tripod, as well as one on a gimbal. For my main camera angle, which is the wide shot, I'm using my red Komodo X, and I'm using this with the Metabones Cine Speed Booster, RF to EF. And this is great because it has a locking mechanism. So now the Komodo X has a locking mechanism on the camera side as well as on the lens side, and I can also utilize a speed booster with it. My lens of choice for the wide angle is the DZO 35mm Vespid Prime, because it gives us a really nice mid to wide angle view with the Metabound speed booster, but it also gives us a bit of shallow depth of field because we're shooting wide open at a T2.1. We have this camera on a motorized slider with a pan head, and this is the brand new ZGCine Batteries 120cm slider. We set this up on 2 tripods, one Manfrotto as well as on my Sachtler. I will probably try to find a better solution for this, but right now this is rock solid. I can lower it down all the way to the ground or way up, so this comes in really handy for interview setups. The slider is a bit on the louder side in different configurations, but for this interview it absolutely worked fine, and it's quite enough for it to work perfectly. We also chose ZGCine V-mount batteries on all of our cameras because all of our cameras are hooked up to wireless follow focuses, and we can power these via the PD outs from the USB-C ports on all of these batteries. As our first close-up angle, we have the OG red Komodo right here, also with a Metabones adapter, but this is not the speed booster, just a regular RF to EF Cine adapter, also with the positive locking mount and a 50mm DZO Vespid Prime. The camera is sitting on a Smallrig free blazer tripod, and this is the carbon fiber version, and it's really nice because it has the same one lock mechanism as my way more expensive Sachtler tripod has, and it actually works pretty well. The only thing I don't like about it is that you can't go very low to the ground, so for mounting a slider like I did behind me, wouldn't work on this tripod. For everything else, this is actually amazing, and it's really easy and fast to work with. My third camera angle is another OG red Komodo hooked up to the DJI RS3 gimbal, and this is the Pro version, as well as another Metabones RF to EF adapter, no speed booster, with the 75mm DZO Vespid Prime. And since all of our cameras are hooked up to a production monitor that I will show you in a second, I also need a DJI Transmission system so that I have a wireless feed going out to the production monitor on the side. The other 2 cameras are directly hooked up to the production monitor just via an SDI cable. Speaking of our production monitor, all 3 of our camera angles are hooked up to our Atomos Sumo 19 SE, and especially for shooting interviews, this is absolutely amazing because, as you can see, we have all 3 angles showcased at the same time. I can also switch between the different angles if I just want to have one angle shown at the same time, but if I want to have an overview of all of my 3 angles, I can do so, and there's hardly any monitors out there that have these features, and this is a really nice 19-inch production monitor. In order to get the feeds in here, like I already mentioned, 2 of our cameras are hooked up directly via SDI, and our gimbal camera is hooked up via a DJI Transmission, but now we have the DJI Transmission receiver, which is also brand new, and this is absolutely amazing because now I don't have to use my 7-inch monitor for this, and I can use the receiver and hook it up to any monitor, in this case our 19-inch Atomos. Our audio setup is pretty simple, and this is what I usually use for most of my interview setups, and that is a shotgun microphone, a DJI S Mic 2S, And since we're filming outside and there's a lot of wind, as you can tell, we also use a dead cat, and this is a small Movo windshield that we just put on top of our shotgun microphone. The shotgun microphone sits on a C-stand with a boom pole and is hooked up directly to a Zoom F6 recorder. All three cameras, as well as our external Zoom F6 recorder, are hooked up to timecode generators. We use Tentacle syncs, and that makes it very easy to sync everything up in post. Let's talk about the location for a second. We're here on my rooftop and I really like the location for this outdoor interview. I decided to shoot the interview at night because I really like the vibe that we're getting over here. Unfortunately, we wanted to start earlier and that way we would have had more lights in the background, but it started raining, so we had to pause for a couple of hours, and now all of my solar powered lights in the background actually ran out of battery, but I still think that it looks absolutely amazing. Now let's talk about the composition. And this is a lot to talk about because we run 3 different cameras with 3 different compositions. Number 1 is our main angle, the slider one. Here I went for a more standard interview setup, abiding the rule of thirds, having him placed on the right side of our frame, but since we have the slider moving at all times, we also had to apply a parallax effect. Means that on top of our moving slider we also have a pan head, and that ensures that our camera angle will stay the same and his framing is still the same even when our camera moves from left to right. And since there's so much going on our location with the plants as well as the lights, this makes for a really interesting angle. On our second close-up angle, we chose something a little bit more vulnerable for the more emotional parts of the interview. And that's why we raised up our camera and filmed him from upside down. We also implemented some movement by just loosening our fluid head and therefore just having the ability to move the camera slightly up and down and left and right. If we wanted to, we could also shoot some close-up angles, and since we have the Atomos monitor in the background, Pontus, my second camera operator, was able to see what I'm filming with the gimbal. When I'm filming close-ups of his hands, for example, he would go to the face and vice versa. Having the ability to use this as a moving angle just gives us the ability to get different kind of angles in a small amount of time. Our third angle was the gimbal angle, and that is the one that I was operating. And what's great about using a gimbal for your close-up angles is that you can also change up the composition. For the more vulnerable and emotional parts, you can move in closer to your subject. You can also angle it down a little bit. Whereas when it's a bit more happy and easygoing, you can zoom out a little bit. Maybe you can even film him from down to up. And in my interview masterclass, I talk about all different kind of angles and how they can have an effect on the emotional state that your subject is in. And if you're interested in my interview masterclass, it went live 2 days ago, but we're still in launch week, so you can still snag up the 25% discount if you hurry right now and go to the link in the description below. Our lighting setup for this interview was rather simple. So let's start with the available light that we couldn't really change. As a main light here on our rooftop, we have a lot of light bulbs, and they are really warm and give off this really nice warm color. This was actually enough to light most of our rooftop terrace and give us a really strong sense of where our light is coming from. So as for our key light, as I wanted to have our look a little bit more dramatic and contrasty, I wanted to have a light that is really soft on him, but doesn't really affect our background too much. So for this, I used a Nanlite Forza 500 B2, and this is absolutely overkill for this, but this is the light that I had. So I boomed it just straight above him, and then I used a lantern softbox with a skirt, and the skirt allowed us to completely control our light spill, because I didn't want to have any light on our background, and I just wanted to have our key light focused on the right side of his face. And this gave us a really nice and soft light, but also the ability to control everything. And since we placed it on our camera left, his right side, we were able to really control the light and also give us this contrast on the dark side of his face. The only other light that we were using was our rim light. And this I wanted to have motivated by a potential moon. And this is why we used this Parotube 30C. We boomed it behind our subject, and we needed to boom it because remember, we have 3 angles and all 3 of them are moving, so we run the risk of having the tube light in the shot on one of these angles if we don't boom it high up. Plus it also gave us the right angle to kind of mimic the moonlight. And I also wanted to have a bit of spill onto our background because realistically, if it was moonlight, it would spill a little bit and wouldn't be too concentrated just on our character. To get this really nice contrast to our key light that we set to 3200 Kelvin, I set the pivot tube to 7500 Kelvin to get some color contrast in here and also mimic the moonlight. The camera settings on all three of our cameras are really simple. We shot at an ISO of 800, which really doesn't matter because we shot everything in ELQ in red RAW, and we shot everything in 25 frames with a 180 shutter degree rule. We shot everything wide open at a T2.1, and we set the color temperature on all of our cameras to 4400 Kelvin. Because 4400 Kelvin sits right in the middle of our key light that is set to 3200 Kelvin, as well as all the practicals that are also really warm, and the 7500 Kelvin on our rim light. And this way we would tell our camera and therefore the audience that we do have some warm light, but we don't want to have our warm light appear too warm because then this wouldn't be really complementary to our subject's skin tones, and the rim light in the background would be really nice and cool. Let's quickly talk a little bit about color grading, but honestly, color grading this one was super easy. We shot everything in red RAW. Then afterwards in post, I chose the red, white, gamut RGB color space. The gamma settings I always use are the Log 3G10. The next thing I did is I took Red's original conversion LUTs. I used the one with the low contrast and the very soft highlight roll-off. This already looked really decent, and since we exposed the exact way on set that I wanted to, I didn't really have to do any color correction, and I also didn't have to adjust the contrast or the brightness. To give the image the desired orange and tea look that I was after, I used one of my custom LUT packs. I used Bluebird from my DC LUT pack Spades for this one. I dialed it in at around 55%, and this was pretty much all I had to do to get the look that I wanted. To give the image a bit more punch, I also used a film emulation tool called Film Convert Nitrate, and I played around with the settings a little bit, set it to around 33%, and that's all I had to do to get the look. And if you're interested in any of the LUTs that I used that I always use on any of my videos, there's a link down in the description below. So this is it for this little live interview breakdown. I hope you liked this style and you also learned something, and if you did, then please hit the like button because it really helps the channel grow. And also make sure that you check out my interview masterclass that is still discounted if you want to dive down really deep into the whole topic of learning how to master the art of shooting interviews. And since you made it this far into the interview, I would appreciate if you hit the subscribe button for more interview as well as cinematography and lighting breakdowns. And now I hope to see you in the next one.